The wind roared like 1,000 storm-tossed seas. In the valley below, the Jordan River shimmered under the sun's glare, its surface trembling as if it sensed the presence of something otherworldly. On the dusty banks stood Elijah, the prophet whose very name struck fear into kings, and whose prayers had once shut the heavens for 3 years. Beside him, Elisha watched with wide, unblinking eyes, knowing something irreversible was about to happen. Without warning, the air grew hot. A light, brighter than the sun, tore open the sky. A chariot of fire, its wheels spinning with molten brilliance, descended in a blaze of glory. Fiery horses stamped upon the wind, their manes streaming with divine light. The ground did not shake. This was not an earthquake, but the heavens themselves shuddered as the chariot swept down. Lucifer had seen many souls leave the earth, but never like this. In that moment, Elijah was not dying. He was being claimed, taken alive. No grave would hold him, no decay would touch him. He was being escorted into heaven itself, beyond the reach of death. And that reality, more than anything, sent a tremor through the kingdom of darkness. Elijah was no ordinary prophet. His life had been a storm of miracles and confrontations, a living testament to the God of Israel's unmatched power. He had stood alone on Mount Carmel against 450 prophets of Baal, calling down fire from heaven that consumed the altar, the sacrifice, and even the stones themselves. He had outrun the king's chariot through the rain after years of drought, fed only by divine provision. The prophets of Israel often faced death with courage, but none had escaped it, except Elijah. The scriptures note only 2 such cases in all history: Enoch, who walked with God and was no more, and Elijah, who was taken up in the whirlwind. Both bypassed Sheol, the shadowy realm of the dead, and went straight into God's presence. For Lucifer, this was a breach of the normal order. Humanity's fall in Eden had bound all men to death. Yet here was Elijah, lifted beyond its grasp. It was a sign, one that spoke of a divine strategy Satan could not fully decipher. From the beginning, Lucifer had sought to corrupt humanity, dragging every soul into the grave. Death was his triumph, the fear of it his weapon. But when God takes a man alive, untouched by death, the enemy loses his strongest chain. The chariot of fire was more than a mode of transport. It was a declaration of war. It proclaimed that God could pluck his servants from the world at any moment, beyond the reach of every snare. For Lucifer, Elijah's ascension was a haunting reminder that death itself was not the final authority. Even more troubling was Elijah's role in prophecy. The ancient writings hinted that Elijah would one day return, standing in the end times as a forerunner before the great and terrible day of the Lord. His removal from earth alive ensured that when that day came, he could appear again, not as a spirit, but in the full power of a living man. The day of Elijah's departure was no secret to him. Scripture records that he traveled deliberately from Gilgal to Bethel, then to Jericho, and finally to the Jordan River. Each step a farewell to the prophetic communities along the way. At each stop, the sons of the prophets approached Elisha, whispering, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master from you?" And each time Elisha answered, "I know, be silent." Crossing the Jordan was no ordinary act. Elijah struck the waters with his mantle, and the river parted, recalling the days of Joshua and even Moses. In the language of Israel's history, this was not just a journey, it was a crossing over, an exit from the earthly mission into a higher calling. When the chariot of fire appeared, Elisha cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." He tore his clothes in grief, but also in awe, for he had witnessed something no other man had seen. The moment heaven reached down and claimed a living prophet. Before Elijah was taken, Elisha had asked for a double portion of his spirit. Elijah's answer was cryptic. "You have asked a difficult thing, yet, if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not." When the whirlwind carried Elijah away, his mantle fell to the ground. Elisha picked it up, the symbol of prophetic authority now his. But the mantle also signified continuity. God's plan was not ending with Elijah's departure. It was evolving. The spiritual realm understood this well. Lucifer had hoped that Elijah's removal might be an end to the prophet's mission. Instead, it was a multiplication. Elisha would perform miracles that surpassed Elijah's in number and scope, ensuring that the testimony of the living God would only grow stronger. Elijah's ascension was not simply an honor for a faithful servant. It was a theological statement written in fire. From the beginning, death had reigned over humanity because of sin. But Elijah's removal showed that God's covenant was not bound by the grave. In Hebrew thought, death was the great divider, separating man from the presence of God until the time of resurrection. To bypass it entirely was an act that broke the natural curse. Elijah's life, fierce in obedience, unwavering in faith, was evidence that intimacy with God could transcend even the most universal human fate. This is why the event unsettled the kingdom of darkness. It wasn't merely that Elijah was spared death, it was that his life proved God could preserve a man wholly for himself, body and soul, and bring him into glory without corruption. Centuries later, the prophet Malachi would record a startling promise. "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord." The Jewish people clung to this prophecy, expecting Elijah's return as a herald of the Messiah. Even in the days of Jesus, the question arose, had Elijah come back? Some believed John the Baptist was Elijah in spirit, fulfilling the role of forerunner. But others held to the expectation of a literal return, tied to the end of the age. Lucifer feared this promise, for it meant that Elijah's mission was not finished. Taken alive, preserved in heaven, he remained a living witness, untouched by the grave, ready to reappear when God decreed. In the chessboard of prophecy, Elijah was a piece the enemy could not remove. The Gospels reveal another mysterious moment. Jesus, standing on a high mountain, his face shining like the sun, speaking with Moses and Elijah. How did Elijah appear there? He had been gone for centuries, yet he stood alive in glory, conversing with the Son of God. For Lucifer, this was confirmation of his fears. Elijah's absence from death had allowed him to stand in the councils of heaven and appear on earth when needed, a participant in the unfolding plan of redemption. His very presence testified that God's promises were active, unbroken by time or mortality. The disciples who saw it were awestruck, but for the forces of darkness, it was another reminder. Elijah's story was not over. Why did God choose to take Elijah alive? The answer lies partly in the prophet's unique mission, but also in the message it sent. Elijah's life was a continual confrontation with idolatry, false worship, and spiritual compromise. By removing him in such a public, supernatural way, God underscored the eternal reward of steadfast faithfulness. But there was another layer, one aimed directly at Lucifer. Elijah's ascension was a preview of the ultimate defeat of death, a foretaste of the resurrection and rapture to come. It demonstrated that God could claim his servants instantly, without the enemy ever touching them. In spiritual warfare, this was a declaration of God's absolute sovereignty over life and death. The book of Revelation speaks of two witnesses who will prophesy in Jerusalem during the last days, clothed in sackcloth, calling down fire, and shutting the sky so that no rain falls. Their powers mirror Elijah's own miracles. Many believe Elijah will be one of them, returning to confront the Antichrist's reign. If so, his survival from death until now ensures that when he stands in those final days, he will do so in the strength of a man untouched by the corruption of the grave. For Lucifer, this would mean facing a foe whose life and mission had been preserved by God for millennia. Elijah's story is more than a historical account. It is a living reminder of God's power to keep his word. His courage on Mount Carmel, his faith during famine, his obedience in the wilderness, all prepared him for the moment when heaven's chariot came. For believers, Elijah's ascension is a promise. The grave is not the final destination for those who belong to God. For Lucifer, it is a warning. God's plans cannot be stopped. His servants cannot be claimed by darkness, and his timing is beyond manipulation. In the quiet after the whirlwind, the Jordan flowed again. The fiery chariot was gone. The sky closed once more. Elisha stood alone, mantle in hand, but not empty. The air still carried the scent of something beyond this world, a trace of heaven's passage. Far beyond mortal sight, Elijah stood in the courts of the Almighty, alive, awaiting the day when his mission would resume. Death had no claim on him, and somewhere, in the depths of the spiritual realm, Lucifer remembered that fiery departure with unease, knowing it was a shadow of his own coming defeat. The story of Elijah's ascension is not just about a man who never saw death. It is about a God who holds the keys to life and death, and who, in his perfect timing, will call his servants home, whether by the grave or by the whirlwind. You've just uncovered another hidden chapter of history with animated Bible mysteries. If you enjoyed this journey, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story where the Bible's words, ancient legends, and divine mysteries come together. Until next time, heaven holds the secrets. Never stop searching.